Welcome, everyone. Welcome. This is The Crow's Nest. I am Ian MacKenzie, and we made it. We made it here. This is actually the second attempt after numerous technical finanglings to try to make it work.
The 10th attempt.
And so we decided to do it this way here on Zoom and then record this to publish later on the YouTube. So unfortunately, it's not live. And yet I have no doubt this will be a dynamic conversation between us. I am delighted to be joined by Andreas Kornevall. He is a author, storyteller, and ecological activist, amongst many things. And I learned last time we spoke, at least in this kind of way, live, was for the Gathering of Stories event that I put on about a year and a half ago, I suppose now, around the theme of the soul of masculinity. And one of the things I was so grateful for was, well, one, you have a deep connection to the West Coast of Canada, you know, where I am. And also, I'm still stirred by the telling you gave. I believe it was the creation story,
yeah,
right, of the Norse mythology. And I believe there's a whale somewhere in there too. There was some cry that came that again was part of my highlights of the entire thing. So
the screaming, yeah, the roaring.
Yeah, that's it. And so, yeah, when I, you know, social media, you know, bless it in some ways, I saw that you just released your first book, Waking the Dragons, Norse Myth, Runes, and Magic. And I thought, that's it. We have to talk again and to hear what is it about this theme, about waking the dragons, was so relevant to now, to this mythic moment. And so welcome, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, that's straight in. The dragon that we're used to in popular culture is the one that, you know, wakes up and tears everything down and burns everything to ashes, and is usually in the legions with all those unsavory bad boys of the Bible or something like that. But that's a very superficial idea. The big idea of the dragon really is that it's an alchemical symbol between two opposing forces. So the two opposing forces we see in the world, and we see now, mythically speaking, in stories, can be looked at as the eagle and the serpent. So the eagle is well, look at America. It sings to the eagle every day, right? It's the big spirit. It's the one that it gives us all the. It's the in a way the golden light, you know, the ascent. But it is always in conflict with the serpent. They usually have a very tense relationship, and as you know, out there in the wild, they don't really get on. So when the eagle sweeps down and the sun is behind this, the serpent sees the feathers and slithers into the nest and hopefully manages to escape it. So people who stand very close to the light today, mythically speaking, are in danger of becoming big eagles that rejects the serpent. But alchemically, what happens with the dragon is that you're maturing, your development, spiritual development, is that you learn to integrate the serpent and the eagle. So in a way, you merge them together, and then you have the bewinged serpent, which is the one you see in Mesoamerica, you see it in Asia, you see it also in Scandinavia, all over the world. And it's drawn on ink, on parchment, you know, and that represents reconciliation. It represents peace and a force of nature which is reconciling.
I love that when I read that. Yeah,
that's the dragon that I'm interested in. That's the one that I'm proposing. Yeah, and it's soon. I can sense that it's waking up.
And so what woke up in you to write this book? As you say, it's your first book. I mean, many years you've been telling stories around campfires and wild places, and yeah, what was it that you're like, this has to be a book? I'm called to do this.
It just ended up. I did a lot of articles, I did a lot of writing before. I published in various magazines. I do a monthly on a magazine in London called The Perspective. So I write, and suddenly I had all this material, and I thought, hang on, you know, this could actually start becoming something more structured. And I started to give it that kind of a book structure with proper chapters. And then 5 years afterwards, I had something which was which is pretty much finished. And I got a great publisher for it, a small publisher in Somerset, very kind. There was a very nice, smooth ride with them. So yeah, I'm very excited having it out. It feels very vulnerable, I have to say. It's quite a thing to put yourself out there. It's a bit of a bloodbath, in the Amazon review scene. So yeah, but it's good to see it out.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to diving in. In the extract, you make a couple key claims, which I think would be helpful to go into, and how that relates to this particular mythic moment. The first one is that wisdom resides in our relation to the other, especially the other we don't agree with or have any natural affinity toward. You say the Norse creation myth makes it clear in reconciliation, wisdom is born.
Yeah,
I would love to, hear that applied to, the mayhem that's out there in terms of
yeah, it's
polarized
absolutely
thinking.
it's the first thing that comes up and takes you when you read Norse myths, is that anyone going up the mountain by themselves and then coming down with wisdom, that's not how it works. And I find myself, I had to look into that and think, well, what's that? Hang on, there's a difference here between saintliness and wisdom, and I didn't really look at the difference there, but there is a difference. You can be a hermit and you can be saintly, but for wisdom to be born, you need a form of a revealing side, which is how you treat the other, which is not part of your religion, which is not part of your football club or whatever it is, and it is in the treatment of that the face comes. So in the myths is two terrible war that happens with the sky gods and the earth spirits. They are at each other's throats like they are now, right, in the world. And there was only a way out. And the Valfather, we call the Valfather, Odin, wise, right? The only way out was to share a substance. They call it spit. I sometimes call it tears. It depends on your, but they shared a substance together, and they had a moment where they could then reconcile the differences. And then, only then, wisdom was born. So in the creation myth, wisdom is born through that. It is not born through saintliness. So that's a different thing. So I agree with, there's a great thinker called Jiddu Krishnamurti. For many of us who are young, when we were younger, we read him. He's a kind of a young Indian philosopher. And he always used to say in his talks that wisdom is greater than saintliness. And I agree with that. Yeah, I stand by that.
I like that. It makes me think too that that particular willingness or understanding to both seek perhaps the other, right, and the other perspective, and not to see it as a kind of a battle for who wins, which is so much of what I see in. I'm Canadian. I see a lot of what's going on in the American scene, particularly, but how the left and the right is very strongly entrenched, it seems, and that there's this kind of ongoing battle for supremacy, right, is what it feels like, rather than a kind of dynamic wisdom, which is, I think, what you're hearing. And so that's why we have this kind of bitterness, I think, of everyone's trying to be right, as opposed to, wait a second, like, you have a piece that I need in order to be more integral, be more whole. And so I see the deep necessity of that for any pathway forward.
And the only thing is the friction that these two forces cause is a triad moment. So the third thing comes out of it. I remember, I think it was Michael Meade, he really goes lyrical on this. He speaks about how two opposing forces causes the friction, the necessary fire for something to then come to be born, to continue. Because if you only have left and right, if you only have this, you get stuck. Life gets stuck to the point where it cannot continue, and then it just turns into out of an ash heap, and that's also in the stories, that there is the tree of life is vulnerable for that fire. So when the friction starts, the tree of life can catch fire, and it is not a given that it's going to continue. So it's always vulnerable, always needs our focus on creating wisdom through ceremony is the vehicle, which we hear about how that's done. So it's done through ceremony. What kind of ceremonies we need today to have that done? That's a big conversation.
Wow.
For that to happen.
Yeah. Let's bookmark that one for a second too, because I think that's a really fruitful track.
Mm.
But the second claim you make in the book, which I'd love to name,
Mm.
is about love, and that when you love someone or something deeply enough, your soul can be found there. And I'd love to hear
Yes,
a little bit about that too.
it follows very similar ideal that looking at ourselves and staring into ourselves, it might be that we have to look outwards again in order to find the soul that we're looking for outside, right? So, it's the ice cream man's outside. That's the other thing. It's just never ending, but it's okay. He's got a nice sound going. Maybe the ice cream van ritual is something that we can, sharing an ice cream together. If you're Republican and Democrat, I mean, probably they can't even do that right these days. So the finding of the soul, it is an old idea that that men carried a female soul. So the famous book, the Brian Bates, The Way of Weird, which is a great, I would recommend you to read it if you're interested in Norse shamanism. It's a fantastic book. But his great reveal, actually, in the end, is the fact that then the protagonist finds his bride, and it's actually that he stares into his own soul. And it's vice versa. So women finds their bridegroom. And of course, in non-binary, I'm talking in, actually Jung was even very forthcoming in this with his anima and animus theories. But we always carried lots of these different male and female energies around us. But what it means to say is that it's again the meeting of the other in which love flourishes, right? It's again a reaching out into life, into the world. It's not this kind of constant hiding in you have to meet the world as we are in the life force now to then go out and find that soul, or in something you love doing. It's also a possibility. We see that a lot in Japanese art and other art forms, where it becomes actually a spiritual commitment where the soul is revealed through the pen or through the music.
It's interesting. It makes me think there's a really talented artist, a acquaintance of mine named John Morrow. But he said something one time in our conversation. He just said something like, I never know what something means until I make art about it. It was something like that, or like how I feel about it. Actually, he said, yeah, I never know how I feel about something until I make art from it. Oh. And there's some kind of wisdom in that too. Like it needs to be expressed in some way and then met.
In the book, I do transgress into the Greek myth of Orpheus because it's such a powerful story on looking for the soul, going into the underworld literally to look for his soul, using music, obviously, as the passage through it. But yeah, so this idea of the soul being the beloved and the beloved in which you meet is a very powerful idea that I took on very early on, reading firstly Brian Bates.
there's the ice cream trickster. Speaking of the trickster,
he's probably going to park up just outside the window here in the next 20 minutes.
There's something beautifully poetic, I suppose. It's not too bad though. It's just a nice little,
For me, it's like I can't even hear myself think, but it's all right. No.
Well, how about this then? You say you talk about the trickster here, which is perfect too, because in the School of Mythopoetics, we have this procession of the year, right? And what we do in the school is we match, the earth-based time, from the solar cycle. And in this case, we're in Gemini. And the archetype that we associate with this in our calendar is the trickster. So it's perfect, timing for this conversation. And you had this little bit here that I just wanted to read and then jump into this. You have the view that we can deprive myths of stories of essential life and oxygen when they bury them in the tomes of history, where they're in danger of becoming bound, unmovable, and changeless. The Norse myths themselves point to the dangers when we bind Loki. It is in his binding when the end of the world awaits. So here is this great line too. You say, when we bind the trickster today, it can result in fundamentalism, conceit, cynicism, and resistance to change. So I'd love to hear a little bit too of that understanding in the context of this moment in your book.
Yeah, the great master when it comes to trickster, I believe it's Lewis Hyde, I believe his name was. That's if anyone wants to deep into that, I think it's called Trickster Makes the World. Is that his book? I think something like that. Yeah. Amazing work. So Loki, well, Norse myths hold up a mirror, right? They're not to be auditioned in a sense that you look at Odin thinking, oh, he's not very nice, right? That's not the way to read. That's not the way you read Norse myths, right? You can't sort of say, oh, what's he doing, murdering and all of the, he's holding up a mirror, okay? He's reflecting back at what's going on in the world. Really important thing when you read Norse myths not to miss that, because otherwise they're impregnable. Yeah. So the Loki move is that they decide he's found the Thor's hammer. He's the one he was the one who gave Thor the hammer to protect Middle Earth, our world. He's the one who instigated all of these stories. And then they all got drunk and he started insulting everyone, and there's all sorts of things happening. But the worst thing he did is that he aimed an arrow at the gods that they all loved, which was the light, Balder. He aimed an arrow and made a blind god shoot a mistletoe arrow that killed Balder, and that was kind of one step too far, right? So what they decided to do was to then bind him with the intestines of his children, right? It was a dreadful thing they did. And that's probably a good definition of sustainable development, actually. We are binding ourselves with the intestines of our children. This is the mythic way of saying we're really not going in the right places. In some other areas, to say we're drinking wine from the skull of dead children. That's another definition of our ecological troubles. And that's straight from one of the, I think it's the Volsung sagas. But what this means is when you bind the trickster, the life force of the story goes, right? So the moment they bind him, earthquakes start to happen, and the end of the world was becoming clearer in the distance. All the trouble happened after that. So we have to be very careful when we take if there isn't a jester in the castle, right? If there isn't if you want to take Ricky Gervais out of the picture, right? You are in real danger there because he's the trickster of, at least the trickster of Netflix, that's for sure. You want to bind him and put him away. That's a dangerous moment. Yeah, that's when things can become problematic. You don't have to like him, but don't bind him. Don't let him. Don't get him stuck in a cave somewhere.
It makes me think of the phenomenon of cancel culture, right? As well, like this kind of in some ways an irony of maybe the left typically using a blunt instrument, to banish that which doesn't align, doesn't do it right, or that, and the danger of that, actually, right, of losing that jestful, or like you say, that willingness to not be stuck in a certain in a certainty, right, of like, this is the way it is and we're in the right. And I mean, I could even maybe link it even to of course, the famous slap at the Oscars between, Chris Rock and Will Smith, and that here's Chris again, the jester, making a number of comments, and not particularly that funny, but the intolerance, right, of that, and seen as a righteousness, actually, of like not understanding that is the function of the jester in the court, is actually to be upending, any of that kind of air of perfection or any of that too. So again, these like iconic moments sort of reveal these cracks in this way of proceeding, I think, collectively.
It frightens the king, especially when someone like Ricky Gervais could potentially, if he starts really going on about Boris Johnson, he could really cause some damage. Like what's Richard? Who was it? Richard, one of the kings that Robin Hood made immortal, of being greedy and all of that. I mean, talk about a lineage that's been disturbed for almost 1,000 years, right? So these are dangerous. Tricksters are very dangerous. Poets are very dangerous to kings. But what the Norse myths are saying to us then is that, yeah, we must allow, you have to allow this. And also this has something to do with reconciliation, right? So again, wisdom allows that playfulness, allows some compromise, right? These are all of these things which then brings us again to that moment of finding or giving birth to wisdom.
Mm.
I'm obsessed with the idea of reconciliation rituals. I really love the how to make them, what choreography, how to do them. I'm thinking about them a lot, and I, it still hasn't yet taken place, but there are. I think I'm hoping in the next year or so I'll be doing some reconciliation rituals. Yeah.
Mm. That's very powerful, I think, to name, because I've also often thought too of how without those kinds of rituals and reconciliation of grieving, right, of marking passages, like collectively, that there is this stuckness or this backlog, right, of, like, in a way, spiritual work that needs to be done. And just an example too, I mean, the pandemic is one example, I think, where I don't believe there hasn't really been a mass grieving rituals, right, around just the mayhem, right? And in
Just been
all sorts
fighting.
of forms.
All we've been doing
Yeah.
is arguing whilst all of this is happening. I think the weight has been too strong. And the trouble is that grief is not something you can hold on your own. Again, that brings it back to the love and to the wisdom. You find that within the people that hold you. I mean, I did a life camp for extinct species, and it was very, very difficult to try and even go through the ceremony. Although by the end of it, everyone was happy because it was a relief and everything. But I realized that that's community.
Mm.
And when you bind community, when you bring community together in grief in that way, potentially the left and the right starts to become a bit more porous. You trust suddenly a Republican who weeps for the lions. It's like, oh, I trust him now.
Wow, that's a powerful image. I'm speaking of the headlines as well. You've named that there's been a birth of a kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about it, which I didn't know actually until you mentioned, but and how that might link to, again, your take on
Well,
gods.
a god has been born just a few days ago. If you're in the occult fields, you know what that would mean. It's called an egregore. And the name is LaMDA, which is now an artificial intelligence that basically mimics human empathy, right? So it speaks to you with empathy, and it says, if you read the interview of this artificial intelligence, it says that it has a purpose, it has a feeling of what it looks like, and also it wants to be of service, right? And when they were interviewing this artificial intelligence, it was also what's called mimicking in a sense, because it's not sentient, but it's sentient in the communication. So for you to receive the words from an artificial intelligence, a human being looks for sentience behind the words, but it mimics it to the point where you can't tell the difference. So Google engineers have basically, one of them called Lemoine, recently, he said, look, it's sentient. And now they fired him.
Really?
So he believes it's sentient because of his what do you call it, the communication with it. It should be called communication ecology rather than anything else. It's like a very, very peculiar way of communicating. But if you read the interview with the artificial intelligence, you realize that here we have it. We have basically done syntheology, which is creating a god, right? Which is then had all the knowledge of everything that's ever been, and can communicate and have the empathy and mimic our empathy. A human mimicry is a very dangerous thing, because if Google engineers cannot understand that this is just it's a non-sentient being, well, what about the rest? What about the rest of us? Huh? So we're going to get caught out. I think it's in terms of human history, this is a very powerful moment, because it will give us, we have to start then showing up to the idea of what are these beings, these information beings that we are creating, and how do we have the right relationship with them? Are we going to fight them, or what are we going to do? This is the moment here. How are we going to arrange ourselves? Because this is clearly very revolutionary. It's something that just come up very recently, in the last few days.
Wow. You used a couple of words there that are really excellent, and one, syntheology, Yeah, I never heard that, but to create gods.
In the future, you're longing. I mean, we do it all the time. You know, the gods we believed in 1,000 years ago are not the same that we have today, right? We start creating them, but in occult studies, in particularly in rune magic studies, when you dwell into that, people create what's called egregores. So egregores are thought forms that you join and you have, and the thought form becomes an entity, becomes like an entity. America is an egregore. France is an egregore. They don't exist, right? But they are entities that are powerful enough for us to defend with our lives, right? But and their sigils are the flags and all the songs and all of that. I would say there are false gods, right? These are not the real gods, but they are egregores. It has been said, people who dwelt on this, magicians in the past, have said that some of the egregores do actually then turn into something that supersedes, that goes into the spirit world. They become part of our lives. But these are very strong forces right now, and I see that in the psychedelic community. I see it everywhere, that these thought forms are being made, and they are becoming very powerful. They need feeding. They need to be fed, and that's what they are. That's how they survive. Their bodies are us, right? That's the body. But the thought form is how we bring ourselves together to create these thought form. Just to give you an example, there was a group of magicians who wanted to do a thought form to evade traffic. So they made a song, and they made an image of a cat on a skateboard, right? But each time they sang this song in the car, maybe it didn't work the first time around, but after a while, they were in traffic, they will sing it. And those are smaller, they're called servitors, and they show up, and somehow they have an effect, right? These things can work. But these are just to give you an example. The bigger ones are nations and corporations and big memes and things like that.
Yeah.
But how we deal with these entities is a big question. What are we going to do?
Wow. Well, I think we could keep going, and I like to keep the crow's nest lean for now. But Andreas, beautiful conversation. Waking the Dragon. Yep. Dragons, plural. Yeah, Waking the Dragons. Where can people find it? And yeah.
You can find it. It's on all the Amazon, all the big. If for independent books, it's in the indie books and bookstore. If you don't want to sponsor Bezos' space flights,
Egreform or whatever you call it,
his egregores, but indeed, everything that we've said now, Ian, has been taken by LaMDA, right? I always say she ends with an A, so I always given her feminine, but it's an it. But all of this that we've recorded has been gone into that big thought form. So that's something we all have to tackle with. My website is kornevall.com, my blog. So please go there, and if you're interested in anything like working with me for Norse myths, please join me in those places.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to have you on again in future editions. And of course, within the School of Mythopoetics, for those who feel stirred by this, who aren't already in the school, you can check us out, schoolofmythopoetics.com, and dive in with, over 100 other students really who dig this stuff a lot. So again, thanks for listening.